Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another gaming podcast. This time, another mini-sode. I know everyone's expecting a brand new episode of the podcast, but we will have one coming to you guys shortly because the podcast is something we're all trying to reinvigorate and get going again. And in order to do that, we have incorporated a brand new member into the podcast, one that you guys are familiar with. He's been on the show multiple times. He even had a short-lived spot on the show called the Mother Base Moment, and that is Alex, returning to Mother Base. He is now a permanent member of the podcast team, and with him on the team, this can hopefully help out in getting more episodes out there. Speaking of Alex returning to Mother Base, hello, he's here somewhere, I think. There he is, Alex!
Hey, I brought fried chicken and beers.
Nice. Well, welcome to the team, Alex.
Well, thank you for having me. As I think the only member of the podcast that still makes consistent YouTube videos, this should be relatively interesting.
It should be. I think I got messages. Checked my Google mails the other day, and then I don't really check the social media tab section of it, like the social email part. And when I opened it up, I had several messages asking if I was officially done with YouTube, if I was coming back. And I think I mentioned it on the podcast before, but I never mentioned it on my actual YouTube channel that I'm pretty much done. So I was thinking about making a video for it saying, hey, don't expect anything on here, but I think I'm just going to let it die off. But yeah, just the whole YouTube video thing kind of died out for me. But I still enjoy talking about video games. So that's why it's awesome to get this podcast going.
Yeah, and I think if
You're still running
anything,
strong.
yeah, I mean, I just do what I always do. But, the recording of videos, and I think Dustin said this before, it's just with life, it's a pain in the ass sometimes to sit down, like, with me, I have like a chorus between the highway and the police and everything going on. Every time I try to record, I've just given up. If it's in there, it's in there. And I think I've even gotten a copyright claim once.
It gives your videos caricatures. So there you go.
He lives in the ghetto.
It's crazy when it just becomes so second nature to you. You don't even hear it or recognize it anymore. It's insane because that is a lot of background noise that goes on.
It is, but it's like you're right. There are times I just ignore it, and then there's other times where like dudes are just honking the horn. I'm convinced they basically just headbutt the wheel and they're just leaving it there until the traffic moves.
I'm convinced. Speaking of horn honking, I'm convinced that there is a jerk who drives by my house every night. Like I'm literally on since I'm a police officer, I'm on night shift. Turn right now, and around every night at around 2 a.m., this guy stops in front of my house and honks his horn, then drives away. I mean, I live back in the woods. I'm like, who is this person who is always honking their horn in front of my house at 2 in the morning? I have no neighbor beside me. He unfortunately passed away, so I know he ain't honking at him because that guy's not answering the door. So I know why he's honking at my house every time he drives by. So
Because you're the only person there who can listen to him honk the horn.
it's like, what is this guy's problem? But anyway, we are actually doing a mini-sode today. Since we don't have all the guys together for this episode, we wanted to get some content out there on the show, and we figured what better way than a mini-sode. And with the upcoming release of a certain remaster coming out, figured what better game to talk about than Final Fantasy XII. Final Fantasy XII, a game that I have very little experience with, but it's a game I know Alex has pumped a ton of hours into, and I figured it'd be cool if we talked about Final Fantasy XII and then possibly revisit doing another mini episode after the remaster comes out, and we would do kind of like a follow-up and see if our views on the game have changed, especially you, Alex, if you don't like changes they made, or maybe they've done some amazing changes with the I know you really want the camera fix. Some combat system stuff or something too, or leveling up because I think it'd be cool. I think Final Fantasy XII was one of those games that, while according to the Metacritic, the game was really well reviewed by the top review sites. But it was one of those games through word of mouth. It seemed like one of those black sheep titles, Alex. Like I didn't think people, the consumers, received it very well, but the reviewers really loved it.
Well, in my case, to be totally honest, I actually have a story about how I bought it, but literally did not even know it came out. I kind of just walked into a GameStop or EB Games at the time, and I just saw a poster and I was like, "Oh, when does that come out?" And the guy was like, today." And I was like, "Oh, oh well then, okay, sure. Let me." I like literally, I knew nothing about it. Story, gameplay, I knew absolutely nothing. And you're right. As time went on, some people that I knew from Final Fantasy XI, when we were playing it all at the same time, little by little, everybody kind of tapered off, just being like, the argument is the battle system plays itself, which it kind of does, but depending on how much you want to micromanage it, it can be really deep. And that was something I really liked, but a lot of people didn't. And then the characters themselves, for the most part, I'd say 60% of them aren't really that interesting, to say the
Ooh,
least.
okay.
But the game itself, it's weird though. It's because there's a lot of stuff going on, and knowing what I know now and having played more games since then, to me it seems like they just ran out of time and they're like, we gotta get this thing out, which is why they did the Zodiac job system, I guess.
Okay.
But I really enjoy overall. I really enjoyed it, and it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, this is wrong with it. This isn't great. This isn't great. This isn't particularly good. But it's an amazing game.
Well, what we'll do here is before we get started into 12, go over our brief history with Final Fantasy and what led to actually us even wanting to get 12. And I know for me, it's a really short list because as of to date, completed Final Fantasy games, I've only completed Final Fantasy 4, Final Fantasy 3 on the DS. Final Fantasy VIII have tons of hours into, but didn't beat it. Final Fantasy IX I have a ton of hours into, didn't beat it. I beat Final Fantasy X and 13 and 13-2. That's pretty much my short-lived series of, or game list of games that I've beaten in the series. And around the time when Final Fantasy XII was coming out, I remember seeing a huge Game Informer spread on it, and I was really looking forward to it and getting into it. But like you, Alex, I forgot it had even come out. Like I didn't know it existed when it came out. So I never picked it up during release date, so I never got a chance to play it. So how about you?
So I've admittedly played a lot more Final Fantasy than you.
Oh yeah.
Um, in terms of finished, 3, 4, which is the only one that matters. 6, 7, 10, 12, 13, 13-2, Lightning Returns, 15, Tactics,
Oh yeah,
and
Tactics Advance. Add it to the list.
oh no, I'm talking OG Tactics for me. And
Ooh,
there's one more I finished. Oh,
Chocobo Tales.
no, that is a good game though. World of Final Fantasy I finished.
Ah, there you
If you
go.
count the spin-off stuff. But I would say, I mean, 4 is my favorite, hands down. It's always been my favorite. Still holds that title, and I've played every single iteration of it, and I've finished every single iteration of it. Um, but I also played 11, and I played a lot of 11. Uh, Way too much 11. And it's actually funny because when 12 came out, as I mentioned, I didn't even know it was due to release. I was so invested in 11 at that point. doing Endgame. But how I ended up getting Final Fantasy XII, as I mentioned, it's kind of funny, I think, at least to me. So I was at my first hotel job right out of college. And basically, I took the job not knowing what to expect. I kind of just needed money because I had student loans.
Hmm.
And my boss at the time, the director of sales, she was doing some sort of promotion because the hotel was relatively new. It was only like a year old, I think, at that point. And she said she wanted to do sort of like a giveaway for guests who stayed at this hotel over 5 times throughout the year. And then on their sixth day, they would get an iPod, like an ro- old school iPod. You know, like
Yeah,
we're talking what 2006. So we're talking like first generation, like a brick
that
iPod.
big brick style. Yeah.
So so she was going to do this for like I think 5 guests, and one of them or two of them rather happened to book at the hotel for like a week in advance. So she gave me her corporate card and was like, I need you to go to Best Buy and I need you to buy 2 iPods. So I was like, okay. So I run over to Best Buy with her card, go to pay for it, and the guy won't accept the credit card because it has a woman's name on it. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I call her up because I have, baby's first cell phone, a flip phone. And I'm like, hey, they don't want to accept the card because, it's not my name. So she's like, okay, can you put the guy on the phone? So I put the manager on the phone. He's like, no, if you have a letter stating that he's allowed to use your card on company letterhead and all this other stuff, then he can pay for the iPods and he can purchase them. So she's like, ugh, all right, Alex, come back to the hotel. So I go all the way back to the hotel. Already has a letter written. It says like, dear schmuck at Best Buy, blah, 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 blah. Please let my assistant purchase these 2 iPods, you piece of shit. Like something like that. Like totally like she wanted nothing to do with this. So I run back with the letter. He looks at it, compares the letterhead, the business card, the credit card, all that stuff, and I buy these 2 iPods. And to put it in perspective, we were talking like $450 worth of iPods for back then. And
Yeah.
at this point, it's like I think 12:15 or 12:30. So I call her up and I'm like, listen, it's like 12:15, 12:30. I'm just gonna take lunch. I'll be back at the hotel at like 1:30. She's like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. So this Best Buy was across the street from an EB Games or a GameStop or whatever it was. And I had some time to kill, obviously, so I went in. And mind you, I was playing Final Fantasy XI and a little bit of WoW at the time. So new games, game releases, other gaming kind of just disappeared because those games really consumed my life. And I walk in and I see this huge poster and I'm like, oh, as I said, when does that come out? Final Fantasy XII. And the guy's like, actually, it came out today. And I'm like, oh, really? I was like, yeah, I was like, let's take a punt at it. I was like, yeah, let me get one. He goes, oh, actually, we're sold out. I was like, oh, all right, then
Oh,
never mind then. He goes, of the vanilla version, I have the Steelbook edition. I was like, whatever. Who cares? I don't even remember how much I paid for it. I don't even know if there was a price difference. All I know is they had the Steelbook version. So I was like, yeah,
what did the
fine.
Steelbook have that the vanilla didn't?
Well, first it was a
Did it have
Steelbook.
soundtrack or something?
It had a bonus disc here. I actually pulled this out. The manual, I think, has some extra stuff in it. No, it doesn't look like it says collector's edition on it, but then the bonus disc I think has like behind the scenes stuff. I never
Yeah.
looked at it. I was only interested in the game, but the steelbook is pretty cool. And then after that, while paying for it, he's like, hey, he did the at the time not so annoying GameStop upsell. Hey, why don't you get the strategy guide? I was like, yeah, let's get the strategy guide too. So I must have spent like $100 on this game I knew nothing about. And I went back to work with it, and I was talking to my friend Gina at the time, who you've had the pleasure of speaking to before.
Oh yeah.
And at the time, her husband was at Basic. So she said, hey, do you know anything about this game? Because she's a big Final Fantasy person too. And I was like, no, not really. She's like, how about you come by my house after work and play it, and let's see what it looks like together. And I was like, all right, cool. So I went over there, and I think I played like the first 2 or 3 hours of the game at her house. And to be honest, we were both kind of dumbfounded. Like, we really didn't like Vaughn. Everything looked strange. Everything was huge. It was big. It was kind of big and open. And she goes, you know what this reminds me of? And she goes, it kind of reminds me of Final Fantasy XI. Like, it had an MMO feel to it. And I was like, yeah, kinda. So I went home that night, and then the next day I was kind of regretting my purchase because I was like, this really wasn't what I was expecting. But over time, playing Final Fantasy XI, everybody who played that game bought 12. And we were all playing at the same time. And one person mentioned, Final Fantasy XII has this really cool system of marks, like world boss battles. And
Yeah.
then you get different abilities and everything. And at the time, playing Endgame in Final Fantasy XI, where it was nothing but world bosses, Dynamis. My info is very dated, by the way. Um, well, we called them notorious monsters back in my day. I don't think C was available at the time, but Sky was available. Like all this endgame, like big boss battle content stuff. And a lot of it in Final Fantasy XI, you had to camp. Everything would spawn like once every 24 to 48 hours with over a course of 3 to 7 days. So if it died on a Monday, that doesn't mean it will spawn on Tuesday. It means it will probably spawn 3 days, 24 hours, 3 days from now. So if you didn't get it, you kind of wasted 3 hours of your life. But this gave that instant gratification of saying like, hey, we didn't get Asphodoshalon, but there's a giant freaking turtle in Final Fantasy XII that's exactly the same thing, ironically. And I would just do that, and to me it was like such a trip. And I honestly don't really remember much of the story. It was kind of boring, as I said, like nothing really happened. But I really got invested in that mark system and the notorious monster system, where I literally did everything, and I even challenged myself to fight like bosses in stupid ways, like fighting the Behemoth King with nothing but guns, which took forever. Uh, and then there's even one boss that is so big and it takes so long. There's a save point in the middle of it.
Holy crap! See, that was the thing though with for Final Fantasy XII. For you, I figured it would be a easy transition for you since you were playing Final Fantasy XI, so you were used to the open world, to that open space dynamic. So I figured like it wouldn't have been as much of a shock, but I guess it kind of was a shock to you guys that it was big and open. But like Gina said, it kind of gave you that FF11 feel. And I know when I popped it in I played it for about 2 hours. My history with it was I played it for about 2 hours the same year they announced the remake. So what I did, I popped it in. I popped it in, and I didn't want to play the PS2 version we got. I wanted to play the Zodiac System 1 since it had the better leveling up system, so to say. You can explain what that is, Alex, when we get to that. And I wanted to play that version because they said it was simpler and easier to level up in it, to do all your classes and stuff. Download it to play on my laptop, emulating it, and the computer couldn't handle it at the time the one I had. But then, like I said, that same week, they announced the remastered edition. So I was like, okay, well, I don't got to play this anymore because I'll just wait for the remaster. But just that little taste of what I got, I knew I was going to love this game because it is the type of combat. I like that MMO style combat feel. That's why I really love Xenoblade Chronicles. Like just that action bar type of menu feel. And I know that's not what the combat system is set up for Final Fantasy XII, but having that third person point of view, you're able to control your character moving around the enemy. It's something I really enjoy and get into. And like you were talking about the mark system, when I found out like there's monsters, like you just go on a mission to just take down these monsters and behemoths and stuff. Oh, I just love that. I just love going after a target and downing it. I don't know like the rewards you get from the game. I know you said abilities. I don't know if you get gear drops as well. I don't know how the game works, but I just know I'm gonna love this game when I finally get to dive into the remaster, and I'm gonna be that guy who you were years ago in 2006, going in and just trying to do things in crazy ways and kill things in crazy ways. Do you think your Final Fantasy XI background did help you transition into this more? Or do you think that's why people maybe didn't like it as much? What were you hearing on the streets? Were people accepting 12, or do you
Well,
think there were black sheep in it?
I mean, honestly, if you're asking for like direct uh, info, really the best source of that for me would be my link shell at the time because we were all playing it. Everybody bought it. Like I literally came home, it's like, oh, I bought Final Fantasy XII on a whim. I didn't realize it came out today. And everybody's like, really? You did? Really? Like everybody day one it. Everybody bought the strategy guide for no reason. Everybody made the strategy guide was useless, just like the Final Fantasy XI strategy guide, which is notorious. Um, and everybody kind of just played it. And one particular guy, his name, I kid you not, his name was Mike too. That was his name, and his real name was Mike. And for the longest time, we all thought it was Mike L because there was two L's at the end or two capital I's. But he's like, no, it's actually Mike too because my dad's name is Mike. And we were like, oh well then,
Nice.
okay. So he was playing it and he was really into it himself. So we'd be like camping these notorious monsters like Fafnir and Nidhogg and Aspidoshalon and Nidhogg and Fafnir being dragons, which were my favorite things to fight. And, you know, we'd be standing around like idiots for 3, 4 hours. And within those 3 to 4 hours, I think it was every 45 minutes, they had a 30-second window within the window to spawn. So you were basically spending an entire day or an entire afternoon just waiting for these things to pop. And it was on a constant rotation. So what we would do is, you know, we'd be waiting and then be like, oh, window in 5 seconds. Window would come up. We'd all hit the enter button repeatedly, and then it wouldn't pop. And then we would do something else. We would talk. Years later, I would actually play. I played a lot of Mario Strikers while doing this during Windows because those games were fast. But with Final Fantasy 11 and 12, it was cool because it was like, oh, we didn't get Aspidoshalon, or oh, Aspid didn't pop, but I'm actually doing the Aspidoshalon mark right now. And it was the exact same fight. It had the exact same abilities. It was crazy. Like they borrowed so much to the point where we all just started saying Final Fantasy 12 is really Final Fantasy 11 single player because we were all into this endgame thing, fighting big bosses. And to this day, that to me is like the best thing ever. And it's also the best thing about Dark Souls. As much as I love those games for the atmosphere and the crazy lore, the bosses are the best part, frustration or not. They
Yeah.
really are the best part. And with 12, you know, you could try to tank and spank stuff, or you could play keep away, or you could try kiting stuff around. You could apply any of those strategies to these boss fights. And it just, there was such a reward to it. And there was nothing worse than when a notorious monster popped, you didn't get the claim. Somebody was using a bot or another link shell got it, you couldn't just leave. You had to sit there and wait for the thing to die, whether they killed it fast or not, because you had to find out what the time of death was so you could come back in 3 to 5 days. Which was, thinking about it now, it's actually a giant waste of time. But you know, it's like it would pop. It's like, did we get it? No, we didn't get. Okay, back to 12, and that's what we would do. We would sit there, like we'd have another TV up, and Mike and I, we would trade strategies back and forth. I'd be like, I'm having really hard times with this like flying thing, and he'd be like, bro, just use nothing but guns, blind it and use nothing but guns, and it was just fun like that because just like in a MMO where you kind of exchange strategies on a forum or you watch how other teams do it today on YouTube, because back then YouTube wasn't as big as it was today. Um,
Yeah.
it would just be like, oh, what part are you up to? It's like, oh, I just fought XYZ. It's like, oh, did you do this mark yet? And I'm like, no. It's like, dude, do it. Trust me, you get bubble. You really, really need that. Trust me, you want that ability. Or decoy or something like that. You want to get that. It's like, why? Bubble, for all intents and purposes, it doubles your HP for like I think 5 minutes. So for a tank, that's really good. Like a tank with 1,000 HP now is 2,000, and towards the end of the game, people can get like 8,000 HP. It's ridiculous.
In the game, is that what you're doing? Are you hunting the marks for abilities, or do they drop gear and stuff as well?
I can't remember if there was gear or not. I want to say there
Maybe
was.
in the quest reward
I
after you
th
finish it?
I think there was, or at least it was materials for different. No, the materials I
Okay.
think you sold for stuff. But for me, I mean, it's not like I'll say like a Diablo where you kill things and get like loot constantly. You get titles, and the titles, if I remember right, they give you access to different abilities, which are actually really helpful. At a certain point, you don't have to do the marks anymore because you have the necessary abilities. At that point, it's all about the challenge, and I think those are the ones that give you gear. Like the ones that aren't really necessary to finish the game, I would say. Like bubble is a
Okay.
necessary skill, decoy is a necessary skill, and then like um, maybe some sort of crazy hat. Maybe you don't need to necessarily do that, Mark, but they're fun. They're all fun, and some of them even have crazy spawn conditions. Like you have to wait for it to be raining, so literally you're just zoning back and forth until it starts raining, and it so much of that is very much Final Fantasy XI, and I think that's where we all, as a Link Shell, kind of connected on it because we jokingly would say like, "Oh, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go play Final Fantasy XI single player," because we really wanted those end game battles, and because of the way Final Fantasy was designed, it's not like a World of Warcraft where you have an instance and then everybody gets to fight it. You know, you basically had it'd be you 17 other guys versus, say, 150 other people all standing there waiting to do the same thing that you're doing.
Trying to get that first hit, and if you weren't lucky enough to get it, oh, you're out of luck.
No, and it sucked. It really, really sucked. I can't even tell you. There was probably the worst of worst scenarios ever. Was there was this one dragon Tiamat that, and I know 22. He can relate to this too. Tiamat would spawn within an 18-hour window every, I think, 4 to 7 days. And Tiamat, for my Link Shell at the time, was a very difficult battle because we didn't have the gear for it. We had the smarts for it, but we didn't have the gear. So we would
Yeah.
take a lot of damage, but we could survive it if we were intelligent. So because the servers were shared with Japan, it could die at US time 2 in the morning. It could die Japan time at 2 in the morning. So this
Okay.
one particular instance, it was the summer, and a majority of us were in college at the time. So we were like, we stayed up late, we woke up early, we probably never woke up, we were hungover, whatever the case may be. And I kid you not, one day at 3:30 in the morning, I got a text message saying Tiamat popped, we need you to change to Paladin and get online.
At
and my
3:30 in the morning.
and my stupid ass got out of bed, turned on the computer, and I went and I tanked Tiamat for 4 hours waiting for people to wake up.
Oh,
And Tiamat rages after a certain amount of time. So the 400 damage I was taking was now 800 damage, and I was barely hanging on for dear life. And we had people playing two different characters. We had one guy playing on his PS3, and then he had somebody else's Bard on the computer, and he was literally running back and forth just to keep us alive until people woke up.
so you're sitting there just kind of self-healing or getting some healing from the bard and stuff, some support for hours, waiting for help to down
Yeah,
this boss.
and mind you, there's at least another. I may be exaggerating, but it felt like 150 people standing next to me trying to lag me out while I'm getting hit in the face with molten death. And then the fun part about the fight was that at night, the undead would come out. So you had to deal with people training skeletons by you using AoEs, and when a skeleton ran through something larger than it, it would cause it to shift to the side, like because monsters can't pass through monsters. So if Tiamat shifted in such a way and then went to attack, it would trigger an ability called Spike Flail. which is pretty much a one-hit kill no matter what you do. So we're dealing with that every half hour, which was a good, which was a good time. It was absolutely miserable. But then it's like with all this nonsense, like through all this, I would just be like, you know what? I can go fight this in Final Fantasy XII and not have to deal with any of this crap. Because I didn't want any of the gear off of this thing. I just enjoyed fighting big ass monsters.
Yeah.
And 12 gave a constant stream of that. You know, you would start with silly small monsters, and then gradually they would get bigger and bigger and bigger and more difficult, and you would have to employ different strategies. And it was funny because a lot of the strategies from Final Fantasy XI carried over into Final Fantasy XII.
Well, speaking of strategies, I kind of want to talk about how this gameplay kind of works. Since I only had a short-lived experience with it, I was killing stuff really quickly. But based on that third-person aspect view of it, do you recall, is it one of those things where that actually comes into play, you moving around characters? Or even if you're 30 yards away, you're still going to get hit by a melee attack? I mean, is there any use in having control of the character, or can you just stand still and attack, select the spell? Do you recall if your movement actually comes into play during any of the battles?
Well, the one thing about 12 that a lot of people in hindsight didn't think was all that great was the gambit system, which, because it plays like Final Fantasy 11, I'll say, because, like, for instance, you have somebody who is a tank, somebody who heals, and then somebody who does damage. You can't rely, because it's active, you can't do everything by yourself. So
Yeah.
with the gambit system, you were able to employ a lot of what-if scenarios. So, you know, you would say, if HP below 50%, cast Cure 2.
Yeah.
If monster is not under decoy, cast decoy.
That's
And
something a lot of games actually use now, though. Dragon Age, set your party members to do
yeah,
certain. So, I mean, go ahead.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like at the time, people were like, "Oh, it plays itself," and I mean, if you're gonna do like the normal battles, sure. But once you hit that, you know, the higher tier stuff, even if you have all those different probabilities like laid out in the system, you're constantly going into the menu, turning some off, turning some on. Like, oh, Behemoth, for instance, is immune to being blind. So why do I have, if not blind, cast blind? Your character is wasting time just casting
Yeah.
blind over and over again because it's not working. So you're actively doing that. In terms of the movement, if I remember right, I think so. I always kept myself as the tank character because I
Yeah.
had to see what the monster was doing. So it's like, you know, Behemoth is raiding Meteor. It's like, okay, so it's like I know it's like, you know, freeze the game, switch over to Princess Ash, who I always kept in my party, cast big ass cure on Bosch, and then that way, as soon as Meteor hit, he was already filled right back up, and then I have him cast Decoy immediately after that. You know, and just stuff like that. But in terms of moving out of range, I think so. But I really don't remember.
So it is more like an active system, though. Like you said, since you're out there, you're controlling your party. You can switch between party members during battle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but everyone's doing their thing during the fight. It's no like they're sitting waiting for you to give them a command. They have auto moves they're doing on themselves or the programmed ones, correct?
Yeah, but that also comes down to the player. Like a player can set up all these different gambits, but if none of the probabilities or none of the instances occur, they kind of just stand there. So if you have
Oh,
somebody designated as nothing but heals, 9 out of 10 times they're just going to stand there. Unless you put down like, you know, if main party member or main leader is attacking monster, attack using, we'll say, arrow. If you don't have a gambit stating that, they're just going to stand there.
oh, okay.
But the other interesting part about the battle system, to me at least, is, and you already mentioned it, was is the job system, because there really isn't one. It's a license board.
Yeah, that thing.
And I personally didn't mind it. I thought it was kind of cool. Like if you thought out how you were going to do it, you could really speed up your progression in learning skills and getting gear. Like the ability to wear certain gear. Um, but it really is important, at least it wasn't that, to, I don't want to say think of like Princess Ash, for instance. Like, don't say, I'm going to make her the tank, and then I'm only going to give her tank abilities, which you can do, but you have to learn other abilities along the way. But you may, in an effort to get to, we'll say, like the next shield spec, skip over the healing stuff. So now she's a tank that can't keep herself alive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think what they did with the Zodiac system is they allowed you to specify the specific job more in an intelligent way, as opposed to just like going through, okay, I'm skipping through all of the leather gear so that this person can be a tank, but now they have no armor to wear that will keep them alive. So, I mean, to me, it's just like it's fun because there really is a deep layer of strategy behind it. You just have to have the patience for it. Otherwise, you can watch the gameplay itself. If your gambits are set up in such a way, you can do that pretty easily.
Is it like 13 where when you go out of battle, your health and MP replenish, or are those things you have to watch outside of battle too? You have to make sure you stay topped off and such.
When you're out of battle, if I remember right, your HP recovers as you walk. No, I know
Okay.
MP recovers as you walk because with the nature of the gambit system, you can't run out of MP because again, if you have a gambit uh, telling Balthier to cast blind, he's going to keep casting blind over and over again until it sticks, and then he's out of MP. So I think it's like every 2 or 3 steps you get back 1 MP, if I remember right.
And if I remember correctly, for a short time I played it, I was seeing the enemies on the field, no random encounters, correct? Or were
Yes,
there? Okay.
you physically engage them in battle, which
That's something I always appreciate now in RPGs.
yeah, I do. You know, it's funny though. It's like at the time, like I'm trying to remember how I felt exactly. Like I felt kind of uncomfortable playing it when initially, only because I was like, this is not what I was expecting. I was expecting something like 10 all over again. Like, and mind you, I love 10. A straight corridor with stuff on the battlefield, and then it goes into sort of a active turn-based thing, which this was not. Because
See, that's
11,
what I thought a lot of people were expecting. So then when you get hit with this MMO style thing, I think it turned a lot of people off. But reviews wouldn't show that. But that's just the vibe I would get from people.
well, it was also the scope of it. I mean, they spent years building this Evilise world line with tactics and everything else, and then they tried it with the Fabuloso Novatellis, whatever the heck it's called, Final Fantasy XIII. But I think with 12 I think they were trying to be too ambitious with it. Um, and then they kind of learned their lesson, and then they kind of I don't think they really went very ambitious with 13, for instance. Like they really focused on getting the graphics up to snuff, and then they had info dumps in text files in a
Yeah.
straight corridor, and then everybody was like, "What the hell?" And you think about it, it's like, okay, 12 was too open, 13 was too enclosed, and then we have Final Fantasy X-2, or not X-2, sorry, 13-2, which didn't know what it wanted to do in the first place.
Now you're getting monsters involved in your party.
Yeah, so now it's Pokemon, which
Yeah.
eventually became World of Final Fantasy, but I think they did a good job at that. And then you get to 15, and 15 I thought looked great, but mechanically it made no sense to me. Like I would even say 15 is probably I may get yelled at for this. It's the closest to that 12 system where you kind of just run at things. You're immediately in combat. Your dudes, they pretty much do specific actions, and you're able to give them some vague instructions on what to do. But for the most part, whatever you control. Oh God, I forgot the main character's name already. Noctis.
Not,
You
yeah.
control him, and you control the flow of battle from yourself. While with 12, you could do that from, in my case, I always did from the perspective of the tank, but you constantly are switching between characters and micromanaging within that gambit system because certain attacks, certain instances, you don't have a gambit for. You don't have enough slots. You
Hmm.
don't have, if tank dies, cast raise. Maybe you don't have that one. Or something like, if poison, cast poisona or use antidote. Maybe you don't have the slots or the probability schemes for that, so you have to micromanage it.
Well, that was one of the things with you said people were sometimes arguing that Final Fantasy XII can play itself. That's the way I felt with 15. Like I thought that game was just auto playing itself, which is why I kind of stopped and got bored with it. Might catch some flack for that, but I mean, that's what it felt like to me when playing that game. Big open, beautiful world, but I just felt like I wasn't a part of it. I don't know if that's the experience you got with it when you were playing, because I know you completed it, but Fantasy 12, I didn't get that feeling at all when I played the little bit I played.
I think I actually tried to think about this. With 15, I thought 15 was ambitious in a different way. It was ambitious and they were like, it's going to be open world, it's going to have all this, it's going to have constant updates, it's going to have a likable cast, it's going to have a car, it's the car you can go anywhere, the car can eventually fly if you take the time to figure it out, like all these things. And it came together, and I played through it, and I finished it, and I thought it was good, but I was like, this game's a mess. Like, it has a huge identity crisis. It doesn't know what it wants to do. It's like, they're like, let's take all the best ideas we have for the series, let's put them in a bucket, let's shake it, and then let's dump it out onto a disc. Because I honestly, at the end of it, I was like, I enjoyed the ending, I enjoyed the characters. That was my favorite part. Which is funny because with 12, the characters to me are kind of boring, but the world itself, there's a lot of open spaces, but every space to me felt unique, and the music fit the tone and everything else. Even though it wasn't open world, everything was an instant zone because of limitations.
So where do you have it kind of ranking on your Final Fantasy list? Have you thought about that at all?
Oh,
Is it up there in your top five, or
uh, I don't, I don't think so. I mean, I'm one of the people who really enjoyed 13, so
me? Yeah, I'm one of those weirdos too. I love 13 and 13 too. So
did you play
I
Lightning
love those.
Returns?
Running turns. I put a couple hours into it, and I got to admit, Alex, the time system where you only have a certain amount of time to do things. I hate that. And knowing that I had that on me, that burden, I did not want to go through with it.
I finished that game out of spite. To be told. So what happened was with me at least, I was I forgot what it was. I was off work that day, or I had the flu or something. And when Katie left for work, I was playing 13. I was like, Lightning Returns, and I'm like, I'm gonna finish this today. And she was like, oh, okay. And then she came home that night, and I was still playing it. And she's like, "Oh, you didn't go for the final boss?" I was like, "This is my 100th attempt." And she's like, "What?" I'm like, "You don't understand. I don't have enough time. I can't go back and level up. I am stuck here. If I don't beat him, I can't beat the game."
See, and that's what I didn't. It's so irritating.
So it when I finally finished it, it was just like when I finished Dark Souls 2. I dropped to my knees. I was like, I was exhausted. I wasted the whole day. I felt worse. I called out sick the next day too because I didn't even sleep. It
Oh
was
man.
it was so bad. But with 12, taking it back to that, I think the real reason why it ranks so high for me is just because of the time that I spent, not necessarily the game itself, it's just the time that I spent playing it. Like 4 is my favorite, by far. Actually, you know what? While I'm mad, let me rank these things. Let me think. 4 is number 1, hands
Oh
down.
man. Exclusive AGP exclusive here, folks. We're getting a ranking.
Let's see. I'd say 10 is like number 4. Number 3, hmm. Actually, I think I don't know. 7 I think is 5 for me.
Put 7 and 5. Okay.
Uh, hmm. Tactics is number 3 for me, hands down. I'd say 6 is number 2. And
Okay.
then which really makes 12 like a fourth or sixth place, I guess. It's definitely my top 10, but it's really just because of the experience I had with it. It's nothing that I would say the game did per se, but I don't know. There's something, it's weird about it. There's something weird. It's like, one of those, I don't want to say bad games or a bad game because it's not a bad game. It's just one of those things where you're like, I really enjoyed this, and I totally understand if you don't like it. That's really the best. That's really the best way I can put it.
But even after all the hours you pumped into it, you're still
I'm excited.
buying a remaster and you're ready to go back into it, eh?
I was one of those people that when they were like, Square has a secret announcement, I'm like, oh, it's either going to be a mobile game or the Final Fantasy XII HD remaster. And everybody's like, oh, no, please, they would never remake that. That was a waste of time. That would be a waste of time. And then finally they called everybody's shit and actually announced one. I was like, yes! Yes! And everybody's like, no, no, what about Kingdom Hearts 3? And I'm like, it's never happening. It's just never
Well,
happening.
we're in 2017 now. It's been what 11 years since its initial release.
Nobody knows what
We
happened anyway.
we've seen a lot more kind of RPGs in this kind of style and format now. How are you thinking? I'm thinking it's going to be received a lot better this time around. Like again, I know it was well reviewed, but like I don't think the people enjoyed it as much. But I think it'll that kind of system is going to do better now with the heavy open world type of system we kind of got in games these days, anyways, and that kind of third person actiony feel. I don't know. I think people are gonna, and we got the new Zodiac system we finally get over here, and who knows whatever other changes they made in it. Maybe there's even more changes
Well,
where
if anything, they have to fix the audio because it was recorded. Like literally, they took Campbell's soup cans and just recorded into those because everything is very tinny. Um, but it's
and the
funny you
camera
mention that.
issue.
Yeah,
Alex
yeah.
Alex needs a camera.
Um, yeah, I don't think the listeners would realize. Before this podcast, I popped in my PS2 version just to see which save data I had still. I only have the one from my second playthrough of the game, which is like hour 50. And I decided to go into a battle, and it's the Japanese camera style where when you hit right, you go left instead. So the camera was spinning all over the place, and I had no idea what was happening. But and I was literally
Oh, yeah.
I was right before like the Behemoth King too, so it was even worse.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, like, how was that? Like, going back and opening an old save file has always been is a really cool thing to me. So, you said you found something like at a 50-hour mark. How did it feel going back into it after all these years? Did it start clicking right away, other than the camera, or
The
what?
the no. First off, the game looks like shit. It could be the fact that I have my PS2 hooked up to an HD TV, but with all the up-resing nonsense I have going on this TV, it doesn't help. It did not, it did not help it at all. I tried changing the aspect ratio to 4:3. I tried to sit all the way back on the couch. I tried to like stand in the doorway to the bathroom. Nothing helped the resolution. It still looked like crap. But and
How
then
did
the
they
camera
do
thing,
this?
but it responded well. Like I went into the menu system. I remembered like all the gambits that I normally use that were activated, stuff like that. Like I remembered who had what abilities because I looked at the characters and I kind of just arbitrarily decided what they were gonna do. Like Fran, I was like Fran looks like a black mage, so she's gonna be my casty person. Balthier,
That bunny.
yeah, that's the
Who's the
bunny
bunny
girl.
ear person? Okay.
I was like, then Penelo, who's like Vaughn's childhood friend, I'm like, she's gonna be like the thiefy one. And then Bosch, who is the first character you meet in the game, and it's funny because he was originally supposed to be the leading person, and they felt like he was too strong of an individual, so they recast him. Which is funny because his opening is pretty big, like it's a big deal, and then you find out it's not about him at all. But I decided I was like, he's gonna be my damage dealer. So the other cool part about it, which I remember, like I was looking at all the weapons I had. I was actively changing weapons on the characters based on the situation because each weapon has different attributes to it. So like with katanas have high combo potential. So for instance, if I could compare it to anything, it's like a random chance to attack twice, a random chance to attack 3 times.
Okay.
So looking at the gambits I had set, my party was Vaughn, Pinello, and Bosch. I was like, okay, so Vaughn is basically there just to pick up the slack. Pinello, Ash was my tank, and Bosch was my damage dealer. So I went to a fight, and sure enough, battle starts. Pinello casts decoy. She runs right at I'm sorry, Ash casts decoy. She runs right at whatever mob I attacked. And then Vaughn casts haste, and he cast Berserk on Bosch, and then Bosch ran at the enemy and then did like a 30-hit combo, and then it just
Oh,
fell. That's the thing. Katanas are deadly. They are so, but it's not the best weapon in the game. The best weapon in the game is the Zodiac Spear. But it's just stuff you could do anything with that system, which is what made it so much fun for me. But I kind of agree with you when you say it'll be better received this time because it's when you said that it made me think about if I can compare this game to any recent title, and this is a reach, and I know it's a reach. It reminds me a lot of Xenoblade
yeah.
Chronicles. That's what it reminds. Not Chronicles X. Yeah. I did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Like the first Xenoblade, just the menu bar system. You got your other party members running around doing. You can set them up what you want them to do to help you out. Yeah, I agree.
No rhyme time, but yeah, rhyme time.
Yeah,
But
it's right.
bunch of jokers. But yeah, no, it's like I could see maybe they probably borrowed a lot from that, and I think gamers today, going into this Gambit system, it was something totally new. But now having played like Dragon Age, like you said, Xenoblade, hell, I would even put 13 on there to an extent with
Yeah,
Paragon shifting or paradigm
yeah.
shifting, whatever it was called. Like I think the system makes a lot more sense now, and I think we've reached that point where MMOs went into more of a spotlight. So folks are much more accustomed to these open world concepts, which is funny because for as long as I played MMOs, if the world is too big, I don't get into it anymore for some reason.
Now I know something Final Fantasy XII did when I was playing it is, yes, it is big and kind of feels kind of open, but it's kind of like you. I think you kind of mentioned it in a way. It is like it's got a bunch of walls, like you have to walk through for loading screens to make it feel open, correct? Like it's not like this huge open space. I remember being in a town, walking through the barrier to get outside, loading screen, then to further extend the planes outside, walk through another loading screen. Is that how it did kind of go, or am I misremembering what I did?
No, no, you're perfect. You got that perfectly right. And that was what was with Final Fantasy XI too, because when that was released, that game, as much as I love it, it was ultimately always held back by the PS2 because they were supporting it. And even though there was a hard drive expansion, it was different from the PC version because the PC you can constantly expand and update. The PS2, it's like once it hits the limit, it hits the limit. So they had to use a lot of zones. They couldn't have these huge open world expanses, and they had to reuse a lot of assets for monsters too. But towards the end of it, they got really creative. But I could definitely see where if they have this huge ambitious game, and somebody were to come out and say, "Listen, get this turkey out. We need this out for Christmas." That's the quick and dirty way to do it because they already had experience doing that with 11.
Yeah. And there's no way on earth I think they had redone it to where that's not the case now.
No, I
But
doubt it.
could you imagine like if they were able to do that though? That'd be pretty crazy. In a way, I guess they did it with 15, but like they finally did it.
Yeah, but
But
with
with the 12 system, it would have been awesome.
yeah, but with 15, everything was big, and you spent 20 minutes in a car just going from point A to B because you were too cheap to pay for fast travel.
This
But
is true.
but you see, that's where my whole problem with open world is. If it's too big, then it looks like you're compensating for something, in my opinion. I mean, 15 looks great, and then you have these huge areas and you can explore, but you can only run past how many hills and mountains and dune trails and all this other stuff before it's just ultimately the same thing.
And that, yeah, and that is the thing with like this loading or instant based type of moving along is once you load into a next screen, I mean, you're in the meat of it still. I mean, there's probably a battle right in front of you got to do. So that's what's pretty cool about it.
Yeah, it's all necessary content as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned.
And I imagine that the PS4 will load things a lot quicker than back in the day. So
The
that should be an
loading
issue.
the loading wasn't that bad from when I played it this morning. There was a lot of it, but it wasn't that bad. It was like maybe 5 seconds. But
All right.
if you're going through multiple zones, that's 5 seconds times how many?
Now, were you experiencing, do you remember any slowdown a lot? Well, I was playing on the PC through emulator, that the newer version. I do own two physical US copies before I catch any flack from anyone. But when I was playing it, just because the PC back then I was playing on, I was getting slowdown. How about actually on the PS2 version? Were you getting any? Because there's a lot going on in some of those battles that I see.
I don't remember, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Particularly with like the spell effects like fire and stuff, like I could definitely see slowdown on that because I honestly don't remember.
Are
Although
there like
I
summons and stuff in the game too? Like classic Final Fantasy, summon a beast or something to help you?
they're all useless. To
Hey,
be
I just got to see it once, man. If it's got an awesome little cutscene.
the special abilities, like your limit break thing, I can't remember what it was called. It was like this weird combo system, and it didn't make any sense. I can't remember what they called it. Um, but basically, it would be like it would you would have to have so many people with maxed out MP, and then it was like Balthier would like extend his hand and he'd be like, "Hoo-hoo!" And then a bunch of stuff would shoot out, and then it's like if you hit the square button at the right time, then Bosch would like pound his chest, and then fire would shoot out of his face or something. It made no sense, and it was this like overly grandiose, like there was no context whatsoever. It wasn't even cool. It was a pain in the ass to even activate it. Like there was no incentive to doing so, in my opinion. But I mean, I really think they spent, to me, honestly, I think if we're going to talk about summons and stuff, I mean, 7, huge. 8, huge. 9, huge.
Yeah.
10, I think they did something really fun with it. But then 12, I think they kind of tried to get away from that. And they tried to, like, and that's really where the series became a bit more, it wasn't really sci-fi, it was more steampunky, which is something I always enjoyed. Like I honestly don't miss chains. That's what it's called. I pulled out the book. So and it's called a quickening.
Quickening?
A quickening. And you want to
Okay.
make miss chains with mischarges. See, it makes no
On
sense.
top of the Zodiac system with the Gambit system and a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, but I don't know. Like I feel like with 13 and this whole sci-fi thing that they kind of took, it's not that I don't like it. It's just like I like 4, so I'm biased, even though 4 has some sci-fi elements in it. But predominantly, it's medieval fantasy, and steampunk I can get behind because it still has some of that. Like, it's like, ooh, airships. We know today something like that couldn't exist, but with steampunk, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, how about something we didn't touch on yet? I know you said that the sounds like everything was coming through tin cans, but how about the music? Because Final Fantasy always has that standout music. Was 12 a success in that point as far as sound?
Honestly, other than the opening theme, I don't remember much of it.
Oh wow.
And I can always like normally there's certain songs I always pick out, but I really don't remember much of it.
Well, that'll be good because when the remaster, it'll be like an all new awakening again for you, the music.
Well,
And you're like, oh, I remember this one.
that's the other part of it for me with the remaster. That I'm excited because I haven't played it, and so like 10, I remember a lot about it. And
Oh, yeah.
even when I replayed it, so Katie could see it, and I'm like, see, this is why I enjoy it. I remembered a lot. 12, it's like I remember the boss fights, and I remember the gambits and the just like gear layouts I did, but I don't remember much in terms of music or anything else. It's very strange. It's like you would think for somebody who enjoyed this game as much as I do, I would remember more about it.
Well, it's like the with Final Fantasy X, it had a better story. And so, since you're more involved in the story, a lot of the music is happening during those key cutscenes and stuff, too. Xanarkin and all that stuff. I mean, they just stand out and pop, and they add to the story. So, like you said with 12, if you're not really into the story as much, yeah, I mean, you're just kind of going by, so you're not really caring.
It's kind of like Star Wars. From what I remember, for some reason I remember thinking it reminded me of Star Wars. I don't know why. Um, yeah, I don't remember if Nobuo Uematsu did the music. I know he did it for 12. I mean, 10. And I think he did some of it for 11. Because 11, to me, and for me, and I'm biased, has a lot of iconic music to me. But I
Going,
attribute that to like areas and everything else.
well, I guess you already shared a that fun story with your paladin battling for 4 hours. Do you have any other Final Fantasy 12 story you'd like to share before we wrap this mini-sode up?
With 12 or 11?
12.
Hmm.
Got any 12 ones? 'Cause I know you got a bunch of good 11 stories. But since that'll be a mini-sode for another day, we could go to your 11 adventures.
I think, I think probably like the most fun I had in that game was when I went to go fight the Behemoth King for the first time. I was like, I couldn't beat him. And I was like, oh man, like I was looking up walkthroughs and somebody put a link to a YouTube video. And this is old school YouTube. Like we're talking like 240p, like everything is blurry, everything is underwater. And I'm
Probably
looking,
with the hand camera and not.
pointing at the television.
Yeah.
You hear people screaming in the background. It's like, God, let's go! Stop playing the game! What's the camera do? It was a mess. And you couldn't see anything. I'm like, I had to like put the video wide screen, full screen. I'm like, have my face pressed up against my old monitor. I'm trying to figure out what gambits he's using. And it was painful. Like, I'm like, okay. And then I heard like a and I'm like, okay, he's using guns. Okay. Guns are good. Guns are good. And I was like, let me try fighting the Behemoth King with nothing but guns. Maybe that'll help. And it took hours. It took hours to beat this guy with nothing but guns. But it was also, I would say, it was stressful. Like some of those fights were really stressful, at least back then, because I mean, I honestly think over time, like I've gotten better at games, but not like I can't play like Dark Souls or even Neo and just run in and fight a boss and kill it on the first try most of the time. But I'm better at analyzing patterns, I think, than when I was a kid, and I have a lot more patience. Except at the end, like the last 10%, because I choke. Um, but with that, it was like constantly just like firing, pulling out gambits, changing in new gambits, micromanaging, pausing the game to take it to like breathe because it took me I think 3 hours. It literally
For one fight.
it took me 3 hours at least.
Well, I want to know about this save point fight too. Like, how long did that actually take?
I think if I remember right, he has something to the tune of like a million or 10 million HP, and it's a dragon, and dragons are like my favorite things to fight. And honestly, it wasn't really. I wouldn't say at that point I was pretty powerful. It wasn't really difficult, just as much as it was long. But there are a few abilities where you're like, you have to prepare yourself for like all the micromanaging you're gonna have to do to make sure nobody dies, and then you're gonna have to keep switching people in and out based on the situation. So it's like it's long, but it doesn't feel long because you're constantly doing something. It's not like sitting around and just waiting for stuff to happen, as it were.
And I know you had mentioned this right when the remaster was first announced, and we were kind of talking about it. You're like, there's no way you're going to put in the time you put into the first one.
No.
To this.
No.
Now, if there are going to be some trophies for killing certain enemies, though, you think you're going to go trophy hunting for them? Or you're just going to kind of play through this, get to the end game, beat it, maybe get some marks? How do you think you're going to go about it?
Here's the problem.
It's going to suck you in, watch. It's going to be like, use your guns and defeat me again.
That's the problem. See, the problem is, I would love to, but three things deter me. One, I don't have the free time in my life to spend that much time sitting in front of a screen anymore, unfortunately. Two, if you keep up with the videos on the YouTube, I got a lot of games I got to play. Yeah. And it's funny too, because sometimes if like when I replayed like Metal Gear Solid 3, the HD remaster a few years back, I talked about it and I was like, yeah, I replayed this, and I was like thinking about it, I'm like, I could have played something I haven't played before and gotten that out of the backlog, but no, I decided to replay something I've played 12 times. But it's good. It's good. I want to say I probably won't, but I guarantee you, like, depending on which mark it is, I may be like, yeah, okay. Behemoth King, I have to do. I kind of want to do the Behemoth King again. I think this time it wouldn't be as painful.
And the 12 is one of those games. 11 online MMO, 14 Final Fantasy MMO. But I always got the vibe from a game like 12. It could be just it doesn't have to be an MMO, but I could have seen it as like you could do it co-op.
Like a Phantasy Star?
Yeah, like it could be a Phantasy Star type co-op game where you could just get online and help a friend out like Behemoth King. Like you can get a party together. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks. We almost made it through the whole episode without something going wrong. But we'll wrap it up real quick. As I was talking about before it cut out on us, I could always see a game like 12 kind of using a system where you can have more, like you mentioned, the Phantasy Star, where you can just go in before the mission starts. I think White Knight Chronicles 2 and White Knight Chronicles series kind of did it really good, especially number 2. If there's just a big boss mission you're going to go do, you party up, it starts a mission, you go fight the boss. Bada bing, bada boom, it was done. And I could just see that being really fun to do in a game like a Final Fantasy XII, or in Xenoblade, like Chronicles X is out, and I'm playing through it right now, trying to finish it up. A game from seems like ages ago now that a lot of people put X down, but that has a multiplayer system in place. It's just really complicated to figure it out, and I haven't figured it out yet how to really team up as a party. But I always like taking down big monsters with friends. It's always been a thing that I like to do. That's why I love World of Warcraft and MMOs. You with Final Fantasy XI, it's taking down a huge monster with a friend is a pretty good feeling. So it always would have been cool if a game like a Final Fantasy could implement more, but still have the single player aspect to it where it's not a focus. It's not an online game, but you can co-op if you want. That's why I think White Knight Chronicles, if no one's played it, I know a lot of people don't like it as much. And me myself, I haven't played it yet, but I think it does great.
I think they canceled the online for that actually.
They did. It's all in the gutter now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, honestly, they were trying to cash in on Monster Hunter when they did Final Fantasy Explorers, and it really is just Monster Hunter. But
Which I'm cutting Alex off. Speaking of, since a guy in Alex who likes to hunt down big bad things doesn't like Monster Hunter, still trying to wrap my brain around that one, but go
I
ahead.
I honestly don't know. Like everybody, all my friends say it. Like one of my friends who I played Final Fantasy XI with, he jokes about it. He's like, "This is the game that you're supposed to like," and he sent like a picture of Monster Hunter Generations. He's like, "You're supposed to like this. Why don't you like?" I'm like, "I don't know." I was like, "I like Ragnarok Odyssey." He's like, "That game is ass compared to this one." It's like I like Final Fantasy Explorers. He's like, that game is horrible compared to. Why don't you like this? And I've tried every
I
single
got
Monster Hunter, and it doesn't click with me. I don't know why.
you, you know what it is? I think because from the little I played Explorers and I play Ragnarok Odyssey too, in Monster Hunter, it can it can take like 45 minutes to kill something sometime, and not having a health bar to see what's going on and having to chase it around to a different screen, it can be kind of annoying sometimes.
You know,
And
and it's
the
funny
combat
too.
system isn't the greatest. It's just a hack and slash type thing, so I can understand.
But when you watch high level Monster Hunter gameplay, like I've watched videos of like Pro Jared playing it, and
Yeah.
he obviously knows what he's doing. I'm like, man, this looks like so much fun. And then I pick it up and, I'm like, this is horrible. And I
Because I think,
honestly just don't get it. I'm like, I want to like it. It just never clicks. And it's the same thing with Xenoblade Chronicles X. I was like, all right, this battle system is inherently kind of the same as Xenoblade Chronicles, and I really enjoyed that game. But X, I'm like, I can't, nothing about it just draws me in.
that's another episode, but yeah, the story isn't like you don't have that main it's don't have that main character lead like a Shulk and them in that game, so kind of takes away from it.
But I think,
But yeah,
I think to your point, I think 12, if there was like a co-op like to fight marks and stuff, like even if it was just like two like generically skinned characters, that would be really, really cool. Especially on some of those mark fights. I think that would add an extra layer of strategy. I think that'd be really fun.
won't happen, but it's
No, it
always
won't
cool to think.
happen. It won't happen. Too much money.
But what we'll do from here is that kind of wraps up our or Alice's reliving of the game since I haven't really played it much. But I was interested in getting his point of view and getting it out there and seeing what the game has to offer, what we can expect for this remaster. So what we plan on doing from here, like I said, me and Alex are both getting the remastered version. I'm gonna try to do a lot of stuff in the game. Like I really took my time with Mass Effect Andromeda just now, trying to do everything I could in that. And when we get into an actual official episode of another gaming podcast, I can go into kind of just my style this year. I've been really doing just older stuff and time sinking into a lot of games that I'm enjoying. So I see myself doing that with 12. So the episode will come eventually of us revisiting the remaster. Unless we deem it not worthy, we might just cover it on another episode. But I think we'd be able to. I think we'd be able to squeeze out another mini-sode or so, maybe about 45 minutes long, just recovering the remaster and what we did in it. I'd picture me taking a little bit longer to do it than Alex, just because I might try to do a lot more in it. So it could be November before you hear back from us. But before
We'll
you hear
see.
back on this remastered episode.
We'll see if it draws
Or
you
you gonna say
in.
sorry, Alex?
I was gonna say if it draws you in. I mean, honestly, too, I think probably if they were able to do it the way that they did 10, where it was like, say, PS3 and Vita, I think that would be amazing.
Oh, if it had a Vita version, oh my goodness, it would be great.
I mean, the 10 remaster looked great on the Vita, and I mean, maybe I don't know if maybe 12 would be too tech. I mean, let's be honest, the Vita's on its way out. It's been on its way out very, very slowly for like the past year and a half, but
A Switch port. Oh man, put
oh,
it
that
on.
would be ridiculous. But, I mean, Square doesn't like, no, Nintendo doesn't like money, so they would never allow it. But that would be ridiculous. That would be, I mean, honestly, I think the Switch is the best portable right now by far. It beats the Vita, and the Vita I already think is an excellent piece of hardware. But if they made a Vita port for this, I would double dip again. If it had
Yeah,
cross save, easy.
me too. I definitely it'd be a game it's something I do want to experience on the big screen here, but being able to have it on the go, oh man, would have been so nice. I'm sure, okay, you got your remote play stuff. I'm sure you're going to be able to do it, but it doesn't beat having that nice, clean, physical cartridge image inside of your Vita or download. I don't care.
I was gonna say my Wi-Fi isn't
Just
good
wouldn't
enough
happen.
for remote play anyway, so.
But yeah, we'll plan on revisiting it and getting our thoughts on the remaster. And hey, if Dustin or Chance end up getting it, I think Dustin said he might be getting the game. Heck, even he can come on the Minisode and we can talk about it, whoever has it. So leave your comments or any questions. Maybe there's a challenge you want Alex to do in the remaster just to mess with them. Leave it in the comments below. Force them to do the challenge. If anyone has fond memories of 12 themselves, go ahead and share it. Share your thoughts on 12 or your hype on the remaster if you're getting it or not. But Alex, I think that about does it, man. I think we're good.
I think so. I think we're better than good. I think we've been doing this for a bit.
Yeah, the minisode kind of turned into almost an hour and a half full-on episodes. All right, guys. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for an official episode soon. Later.
Toodles. Toodles.